Welcome to Dave Talks Comics. I'm Dave. This is my podcast where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. This is episode 168. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. In addition to the program's website, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. Well, there's a Facebook page for it which links to the program's website. You can find my notes on what I have read at davetalkscomics.net. I'm going to be talking about some books that I read. There may be spoilers, although these aren't new or very recent comic books that I'll be talking about, although a few of them are from the past 10 years. Okay, so on this episode, I'm going to be hitting a little bit of everything that I like to say this podcast is about. I'm going to talk about some books that I read. I'm going to be talking about some television movies that I watched, and I'm also going to be talking about a very small convention that I went to. So I'm going to do those in kind of reverse. Well, I'm going to start with the convention talk. So today, this is August 18th that I'm recording this, although I've got a feeling I'm not going to get this episode out until sometime in early September. Today I went to a show. There's a local group that puts on a show like every 2 or 3 months. I think they call them Schoff Productions or something like that, SHOFF, in the Washington, D.C. area. So they had a show out in Tyson's Corner, very close to where I used to work for a short period of time, less than a year. About 4 or 5 years ago. I decided I wanted to go to the show. I quite often miss it because I'm doing other things. I don't have the time. I've really been pushing myself lately, trying to get as caught up on other things as I could, and I decided I wanted to go to the show. So I did. So it's like a 25, 30-minute drive for me from where I live, under good conditions. So I went to the show. It's only $3 to get in. I looked around to see what they had. They didn't have a huge number of dealers. The room is kind of divided half and half between, there's dealers who are dealing in cards, mostly sports cards. I think I only saw one dealer that had any non-sports cards. And when I was little, I had some interest in sports cards, but I've never really stuck with that. So I spent most of my time on the side of the room where the comic book dealers were. I looked at a few tables. I bought a few things. I spent less than $20, and that includes the $3 I paid to get in the door. There were a number of dealers with what I think of as, well, maybe not overpriced books, but certainly books that cost more than I feel like paying for the most part. I did look through some of those boxes, not the wildly expensive boxes like of Silver and Golden Age comic books, but I did look through some boxes like $2, $3, $5 books, and occasionally I ran across some things that were considerably more expensive than that. But I probably spent a lot more time looking through boxes of $1 or 50-cent books. I didn't find any 50-cent books that interested me. I did find a few $1. Let's see, I think I bought 2 comics that cost $1, one that cost $2, and then I bought 2 trades. So the 2 trades are the first things that I got. I found the 2-volume collection of the Hard Traveling Heroes. This is the Green Lantern, Green Arrow run from like the early 1970s when Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams were doing the book. They did it for about a year and a half, something like that, from issue 76 to issue 89. There was one reprint issue in there. So there's 2 collections. This run has been collected a number of times. My problem with some of the more recent collections is that DC Comics has allowed Neil Adams to go back and redraw some of the things in these comics because he wasn't happy with how they looked. And I didn't realize, or maybe I knew, but I'd forgotten about, that there was a reprint series from 1983 that reprinted this run of Green Lantern, which on the cover would say Green Lantern, Green Arrow, but the title of the comic book was still just Green Lantern. This was the series that began in 1960. So as I was saying, these 2 volumes collected basically from issue 76 to 89, but there's a few caveats there. For starters, the first volume in the indicia, it says it collects issues 76 to 82. But when I actually went through the book and compared the stories to what's actually in those issues, it actually collects issues 76 to 81 and also issue 83. For whatever reason, issue 83 isn't mentioned in the indicia, but the story from issue 83 is definitely in that comic book, and the story from issue 82 is definitely not in that comic book. So that was kind of strange. And I spent a while online after I got home checking on this, and the Grand Comics database even has this wrong. They even have that issue 82 is in that collection, and issue 83 is not, which is just bizarre. And then the second collection is issues 84 to 87 and issue 89, and then 3 backup stories from Flash numbers 217, 218, and 219. So the story here is that issue 88 was a reprint issue. It did not include any material from, I don't think it did, certainly no comic book stories, no superhero stories from Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. It did not include any stories by them. Neil Adams did do the cover for this issue, so it has a new cover. It's not a reprint cover, but the interiors is all reprint material, and I guess that's why they didn't include anything from it. Now, Flash 217, 218, 219, the story there is that Green Lantern got canceled with issue 89. They still had another story left in them. They probably had completed, and for whatever reason, DC Comics did not publish it. I have not researched this. I'm not certain about this. But basically, it seems like they took what should have been issue 90 and spread it across the backup, the back pages of those 3 issues of Flash, because the stories that appear there, and it's really one story, is written by Denny O'Neil and are drawn by Neil Adams. The original issues in this run of Green Lantern did include backup features. None of those are in this collection, these 2 books. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say about these? I wrote out a lot of notes before I turned on the recorder. Let's see, the 2-volume series collected. Yes, there's no, right, I talked about that. Green Lantern was canceled. Yes, I talked about that. Oh, yes, I also want to mention that Green Lantern returned. So it was canceled with issue 89, which was cover dated April-May of 1972. Green Lantern returned to publication with issue 90, August-September of 1976. And Denny O'Neil picked up as the writer, but Neil Adams had moved on to other things. And so there was I believe Mike Grell did the first issue and did a number of issues, but I'm not sure exactly how long he stuck with the book. And Neil Adams, I don't think, ever returned to Green Lantern, although he might have done some covers for some more recent issues in the past 10 or 20 years. And I mentioned that part of my interest in buying this collection is because I'm not certain on this, but I think that none of these pages were redrawn by Neil Adams. And I'm probably overstating when I say he redrew pages. I think he redrew certain things like faces and certain aspects, at least from what I understand. And from what I remember, this became an issue when they started doing these collections don't have, Neil Adams' name is inside in the credits, but his name is not on the cover of these books. They started to do some collections of Neil Adams' work in the early 2000s, his work on Batman, his work on Green Lantern. I don't know if there's probably Dead Man, but I'm not certain about that. And I believe that was when he started to redraw. And like I said, these issues, basically these collections came out in 1994. The reprint series came out in 1983. The original issues came out in the early 1970s. I believe that this reprint collection was taken from the same pages, same reprints, whatever you want to call it, that they took the reprint series from 1983. So I think that these pages are not redrawn, and I've certainly flipped through them. I've looked through them. I'm eager to read them. I don't know how soon I will get to them. I have a number of other things, like another thing from the 1970s that I bought, I think last year at Baltimore, that I want to read still, that I have not read yet, is that Manhunter run by, I believe it was Archie Goodwin and Walt Simonson. And that's not too long. It was a backup series, but so I don't know exactly how soon I'll get to this. Oh, one other thing that I wanted to mention, if you go back to episodes 5 and 7 of this podcast, of Dave Talks Comics, I talked about the saga of Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul in those episodes. And that was another case where I bought the reprint series. I think I got that for something like $10 back then. I don't know how. I think I got a pretty good deal on it. And I read that because I wanted to read those Neil Adams stories when he was first drawing Batman and see what that was like without reading the redrawn issues, just like with this Green Lantern series, or this Green Lantern series. So you can, if you want to hear what I had to say back then, go back to episodes 5 and 7 of the podcast. So those were the two trades that I bought. As far as comic books, I bought 3 comic books. First one was Secret Origins number 29. This is the 1986 series of Secret Origins. This one features Captain America. This is DC Comics. The Atom, Mr. America, and the Golden Age Red Tornado. And this is a series that I think I have about 15 issues of it at this point. And I would like to collect it all. There was 50 issues, regular issues. I believe there was 2 annuals and there was a special. I have the special. I don't have either of the annuals. One of them is the one that John Byrne did of the Doom Patrol, and that one I definitely want. Because I'm a big fan of the Silver Age Doom Patrol. I have not read any of the Grant Morrison, but I do have all 5 of the DC archives, and I've read them all and I talked about them a little bit on an episode or two. If you go to the podcast website and there's a search bar there, you could just type in Doom Patrol and see where I talked. I think there was 2 episodes where I talked about that series. Also from that same dealer, I found Justice League of America number 199. This is part 2 of a story which I think in part inspired a story from the JLU cartoon, the story called The Once and Future Thing, specifically part 1 of that, which was titled Weird Western Tales, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I did talk about that on the podcast. This was a story where the JLU, or at least in the cartoon, it was, I believe, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern end up getting thrown back in time. They're trying to stop a thief, and the thief has some time-traveling technology, and he uses it to throw them back in time. No, I know what happened. It was he jumps back in time to escape them, and they jump after him, and they all wind up in Nevada in the 1880s, I think it is. And Jonah Hex and some of the other DC Western heroes are in that episode. And it was a 2-part, and in the second part they go into the future. But I don't think that future part is in this series. But this comic book, this 2-part story, and I don't have the first part, which would be in issue 198. This 2-part story only focuses on them getting thrown back in time to the Wild West, as far as I know. And those characters who were in the cartoon, I believe, are also in this story, or they may have substituted 1 or 2 characters. I don't know if it's the exact same characters. I think that there are more heroes than just Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern in the comic book. But I haven't read that story before, so once I can get my hands on issue 198, I'll be eager to read that, and who knows, maybe I'll go back and rewatch that JLU story, because it is one of my favorite. I think it's a really good standalone JLU story in a series that has a great arc to it. But anyhow, there was one more thing I got at the the show, let's say. It wasn't really a convention, it was a show. And that was X-Men Grand Design #1. I've read a number of things that Ed Piskor has written and drawn. I read the first volume of the Hip Hop Family Tree. I really should get back to that and read some more. And I read WYSIWYG that he wrote and drew. I'm not sure what else he has done. Yeah, nothing else is coming to mind. But X-Men Grand Design definitely looked like something. I like a lot of the early X-Men stuff up to about issue 183, which is where I stopped collecting when I was collecting X-Men back I collected from about issue 150 to 183 when I was a kid. And I've never really I've read a couple stories after that, but that's basically the extent of my collection. Anyway, I'm really interested in this. I flipped through it. It looks good. I'm really interested to see what he does with this. I've seen the videos. I've seen online that apparently Tom Scioli, who's a friend of Ed Piskor and of Jim Rugg, on their podcast, which is called what is it called? Their podcast, I'm blank. Oh, Cartoonist Kayfabe. That's what it's called. And I saw one of them I went to one of their panels at HeroesCon, although their panels, as far as I know, still have not. The Cartoonist Kayfabe panels, no, that's not entirely true. One of them is up. The interview with Bill Sienkiewicz is up, and I did listen to that. And there is, if you go to Stitcher, there is an audio-only version of their podcast, so you don't have to watch it on YouTube or listen to it through YouTube, because depending on what they're covering on the podcast, sometimes they put a lot of visuals in there, like scans of pages. Like I listened to their episode that they did on, what was it, on For the Man Who Has Everything, and they did a lot of editing and put in a lot of pages from The Man Who Has Everything in that episode. But when they're just talking, or when they're just doing an interview, quite often it's just them on the screen talking, and you don't really need to see what they're showing on the screen, because you're really, I don't know, I guess unless you really want to see their facial expressions, you don't really need to. Anyhow, I'm looking forward to reading this. I believe this was a X-Men Grand Design. There was 3 two-parters. Yes, 3 two-parters. So all I have is the first issue at this point. At some point I'm going to read this issue, and then hopefully at some point I will seek out the other issues, at least part 2 of this first two-parter. So that's it for the show. But I've also been reading and watching. So I'm going to try and go through this kind of fast, I'm going to try and not spend too much time talking about each one of these things. But I want to just give you a rundown of what I have been reading. Now, you can read my notes on what I've been reading at DaveTalksComics.net. And I don't think I have notes up for everything that I'm going to talk about here as of the time I'm recording this, but hopefully by the time that this gets posted, the notes will be available. So I'm not going chronologically here. I'm just going to go in the order that I wrote these things down. So the first thing I have here is Green Lantern numbers 125 to 128. Denny O'Neil was still writing the series at this point. I don't recall who was drawing it. Once again, you can look at go to DaveTalksComics.net. If you don't see Green Lantern there on the front page, you can either do a search for it, or you can click on the index link, and that will give you a list of all the comic book series and you can just scroll down to Green Lantern and then click on Green Lantern, and it'll bring up just the Green Lantern stuff that I have reviewed, or I don't think reviewed, that I've made notes about. Yeah. Although there is opinions in there, but the website is a combination of notes about the stories and opinions on the stories, and sometimes, research notes on things that I've looked up. Oh, this character first appeared here, or I know this character from this story better. That's the sort of stuff that you'll find at DaveTalksComics.net. So Green Lantern's 125 to 128, which includes the story with the Green Lantern Corps, where they're fighting the Weaponers of Quard. Sinestro is in there. There's somebody who doesn't seem to be what he is. There's the shark shows up. Green Arrow is not in these issues. I wasn't crazy about them. I talked about this a little bit in the Heroes Con episodes, at least one of the Heroes Con episodes, because I picked up the one issue I was missing in that 4-issue run. There's still a few issues that I'm missing to continue reading. So that's it for those issues of Green Lantern. Next thing, and I think I mentioned the first of these issues on episode 163, which was the last episode I did before Heroes Con. And this is All-Star Squadron issues 36 and 37. This was the story that involved the Marvel family. Well, the character is now known as Shazam, but at the time was known as Captain Marvel. Let's see, there was Mary Marvel, there's Captain Marvel Jr. Now, at the time this story came out, the Marvel family existed on a separate Earth. They existed on Earth S, which I guess S is for Shazam. And somehow Hitler had drawn them to Earth 2 and then split them between their selves, so Captain Marvel was Billy Batson, but he would say Shazam and he'd turn into Captain Marvel. Well, somehow Hitler, using the Spear of Destiny and some of his scientists, or maybe it was all scientific, I don't know, uses whatever means they use to split them in two. And so you get these fights between Superman and Captain Marvel, and of course Mary Marvel, and I think Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Captain Marvel Jr. or something like that. It's not a bad story. I just think the execution's a little off. I also read it digitally. I have the original issues, but they did something, especially with the coloring on issue 37, that in the digital version does not do it any favors. The colors are too sharp, and I say this in the notes. So I think I'm going to move on. The next thing, which I'm reading still, I'm almost done with the issues that I've bought so far. I got these through Comixology, and that is Lazarus. I picked up during a sale the first 9 issues of Lazarus, which is the first 2 arcs. And I got to say, I'm really impressed by the series. I've enjoyed some of Greg Rucka's other work. I think he's a very good writer. The only things that come to mind immediately, well, the first thing of his that I read was Queen and Country. I didn't read all of it, but I read like the first 7 collections of it, of the little trade paper. That's like the first, I want to say 28 issues or something like that. The series, it's a very good series, although there he was working with a different artist for each story arc. But this is a very good series. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic, well, not post-apocalyptic, but it's definitely a dystopian future where businesses have taken over, are running the world, basically. The main character is a woman named Forever, and she is the Lazarus, and Lazarus is a title in this world. She is the Lazarus for her family. I think I talked about this a little bit, but I'd only read the first 2 issues in episode 163. So I finished off the first arc, which is the first 4 issues, which kind of introduces you to the world and sets things up. I thought the first arc was good. The second arc is blowing me away. So the first arc is called Family. The second arc is called Lift. I have not gotten to the finish. I've got a feeling I know one of the things that's going to happen in that last issue of this arc, and it's going to be, it's going to be really heartbreaking, I think. And they've been teasing it throughout, and not in a way that's obvious, but if you know what these kinds of stories are like, it's, oh man, the facial expressions, just the looks, it's just so good. And this character who is the what's the word, the I can only think of the Latin term, the paterfamilias, the father of the family, starts off and just seems a little hard-edged. Well, by the end of this arc, I think I'm really going to hate him. Really going to hate him. And I'm really starting to hate him at this point. Anyhow, that's Lazarus. It's really, really good. Okay, next we have Ikigami. I finally read the 6th episode, which is the second story in the 3rd volume, the 3rd collected edition of Ikigami. This is a manga series set in I know I've talked about this on previous episodes, in a dystopian type future where people get injected when they're kids, and then 1 in 1,000 people finds out somewhere between the ages of 19 and 25 or something, or 18 and 25, that they're going to die. And not only are they going to die, but they're going to die within 24 hours of the time they're notified. And then you see what happens to them. And this story was about a brother and sister. The sister is blind. She's in her like early to mid-teens. The brother is in his 20s, and it's the brother who gets the notice. You always find out who gets the notice by the end of the first chapter, and there's only 3 chapters in every story. And then, of course, you also get the story. There's the ongoing story of this guy who's delivering these notices. So it's always the same person delivering these notices to people. And sometimes people flip out, and this character does flip out. And I probably shouldn't say anymore, but I wasn't completely taken by it at first. Because I thought I knew how it was going to go. And to a degree I was correct, but I don't know. There was just something about it that, once again, the art is really good. The facial expressions are really good. But it really grabbed me. It really got me by the end of the story. And what I thought could have been very trite and very forced or very by the numbers really had something there that got to me. Okay, next is jumping back to Heroes Con, kind of, is something that I think I am almost certain that I mentioned in the Heroes Con, one of the Heroes Con episodes, and that's X-Force number 8. I picked this up. I have not read any other issues of X-Force. I think I have X-Force number 1, which I think I inherited from my brother. I've got a lot of comics that he bought back in the, I guess, well, this would be probably the 80s and the 90s. I think this was the 90s, I think. But this issue is different from all the other issues in that most of it was drawn by Mike Mignola. So I read it. There's notes about it. There's not a lot of notes about it. It's kind of neat to read this, to see how Mike Mignola draws those characters. And so that's X-Force number 8. If you're interested in more information, go to davetalkscomics.net and do a search for X-Force. And you should find it's the only issue of X-Force that I've written anything about. Moving on, I finally picked up volume 6, I believe it is, of the New Teen Titans collections. This series, which I think is up to volume 9 or 10 at this point. This is the original, well, it's the original New Teen Titans, not the original Teen Titans, but the original run of New Teen Titans, which began in 1980. So far, I've read 3 of the issues from volume 6. Issues 35, 36, and 37. 35 and 36 didn't really do it for me in a big way. I wasn't really taken by either one of them. Issue 37 is also in the collection of Batman and the Outsiders. And if you go back to episode 162 of the podcast, I believe I talked about Batman and the Outsiders. I had read issues 1 through 4 at that point. I have one of the first of the recent Batman and the Outsiders collections, which I believe collects the first 10 issues or something like that, or maybe it's 12 or 13 issues of the series. And I'd read issues 1 through 4, but then issue 5 is part of this crossover between the New Teen Titans and Batman and the Outsiders. And so I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I decided to wait until the 2 series synced up. So that's the point that I'm at right here. So I read New Teen Titans number 37, which is part 1 of the crossover, and then Batman and the Outsiders number 5, which is part 2 of the crossover. I've actually talked about this before on the podcast. If you go back to episode 82 of the podcast, you'll find my review. Let's see, that was 2015, July of 2015. So a little over, just over 3-4 years ago. I read it then. I read it also when I was a kid, when it first came out. I bought those issues when that story first appeared in 1983, 82. 83 or 84, I think. So if you're interested in my thoughts on those 2 issues, those 3 issues of New Teen Titans and that issue of Batman and the Outsiders, there are my notes at davetalkscomics.net, and then there's also episode 82 where I just talked about those New Teen Titans 37 and Batman and the Outsiders #5, the crossover. And I haven't really gone back and listened to that episode yet. I've written out all my notes for the crossover this time, but I'm curious to see if there's anything that I picked up on or anything that struck me. I find that sometimes when an issue, I wasn't crazy about it this time around. And I find that sometimes when I'm not crazy about something, I do more research and I get more thoughtful about it. And maybe I'm not as excited about it, maybe I'm not as passionate about it, but at the same time, sometimes it leads to other interesting things. It leads me down rabbit holes, and I start talking about things that I wouldn't have talked about, or that I wouldn't have talked about, that I'm not sure. But sometimes it can lead to some interesting explorations and some interesting notes, and it's a different sort of experience. Let's put it that way. The next thing on my list is Captain America issues 273 and 274. These are a two-part story. This is written by David Anthony Kraft, who also wrote at least 3 other stories in this run of Captain America that I'm in the midst of, which started around issue 257, something like that, around the time that Mike Zeck became kind of the regular penciler on the series, although he doesn't pencil every single issue. And then later J.M. DeMatteis became the regular writer. I think that was issue 261. He became the regular writer. But of course, as I just noted, he didn't write this story. This was David Anthony Kraft. There's a lot of interesting history in this story. You know, flashbacks to other stories, the origins of, well, not of the Howlers, but some stuff from the 1960s. I think there's like 2 or 3 flashbacks in there. You'll find some notes about my notes on the notes at DaveTalksComics.net. And that's as far as I've gotten for right now, but my plan is, of course, to read up through issue 301, I believe it is, of Captain America. So I have over 25 issues still to go, and I'm almost at the end of what I had read when I was a kid, at least. Issue 276 will be the last one that I got in my subscription when I was like 12, 13 years old. Next up is Marvel 2-in-1 issues 42 and 43. These are the first 2 issues that are in the collection. If you have, or if you've seen the Marvel 2-in-1 Project Pegasus collection, these are the first 2 parts of that. I think this is the first, 42 is the first appearance of Project Pegasus. And then there's a story, it continues, it jumps after issue 43 to issue 53, and I believe there's 6 issues there, some of which I think were drawn by George Perez and some by John Byrne, if I'm remembering correctly. And I'm blanking on who the writer is, but once again, you can find the names of the creators in my notes at DaveTalksComics.net. And then the last thing as far as reading goes that I wanted to mention is Terry and the Pirates. I'm still reading Terry and the Pirates. I've slowed down, although lately, this past week or 2, I've started to pick up the pace again. But I finished off the 5th arc overall, the 3rd arc of the dailies only, and I think I might have mentioned this before, early in the run of Terry and the Pirates, which began in October of 1934. Originally, it was just a daily strip. Then they added a Sunday strip, and for the first year and a half or so, I think it was until August of 1936, so almost 2 years, the dailies and the Sundays had their own continuity. Same characters for the most part, at least same main characters, but they had their own continuity. And so far, like one villain, the Dragon Lady, she has only appeared in the Sunday strips up to this point. So I'm starting in on the 6th arc, which is a Sundays only arc. The 5th arc is a dailies only arc. It has some highs and some lows. It has some moments that I thought were the best up to this point, where you get some really good moments, and then there's some stuff which is really bad. And it's some things they do with one of the characters dressing up in yellow face, and it just really, yeah, not good. Not good at all. So that's it for everything that I've been reading up to this point. Oh, well, one other thing I could mention is that I've picked up the American Comic Book Chronicles for the 1970s. It's not short. It's like 300 pages. There's a lot of pictures, but there's a lot of text. I'm still on the first chapter for 1970, which is a little significant for me because it's the year I was born. So it's interesting to see some of the things that were happening. Jack Kirby moving to DC Comics and some of the other things. I think they mentioned the Hard Traveling Heroes, the Green Lantern, Green Arrow by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams in there. I think that's when they started that in 1970. So I'm working my way through that chapter. It's probably going to take me a while to read it, but if I'm slowing down and reading comic books this time, it's because sometimes instead of reading the comic books, I'm reading from this book. And I had bought I have a hard copy and I also have the digital copy. So I'm reading pretty much from the digital copy, but the hard copies are beautiful. And I also did support, there was a recent Kickstarter to reprint the 1980s volume. And so I did support that at the level to get both a digital and a hard copy of the book. So the American Comic Book Chronicles. And these are put out by Tomorrow's Publishing. If you Google Tomorrow's, and that's TWOMORROWS, you should find it. They put out a lot of good stuff. I'm pretty sure I talked about them in the Heroes Con episode because I know that I bought a copy of back issue when I was at Heroes Con. And I may end up buying a digital copy of that just because it's easier to read on my commute, which is when I do a lot of my reading. Okay, so I want to move on to stuff that I've been watching. Try and wrap up this episode with stuff I've been watching. Okay, so first, I'm going to break this into three categories. First, I'm going to talk about movies. Then I'm going to talk about anime. And it's all television anime. Actually, one of the movies is anime. And then I'm going to talk about other TV stuff that I've been watching. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. Now, television things, I have notes on those. Once again, they are spoiler-filled notes. But I do have notes on them, probably more appropriate if you've already read them, if you've already watched these things, or if you don't really care if you get spoiled. So the first movie is three movies I want to mention. The first one is Toy Story. When Toy Story 4 came out, I decided I wanted to rewatch these. I saw the first and second movies in the theater. I've never watched the third one. So, and I looked on Amazon and I saw that they were reasonably inexpensive. I mean, like $10 a piece, something like that. So I bought all three. I've watched the first one so far. It lived up to about my memory of it. There was a lot in there that I did not remember. I think it came out in 1994. I had not seen it since 1994. There was one thing about it, and you can find this in the notes, that kind of struck me wrong this time. I have no notes from and no recollection of this particular thing from when I first saw the movie. But there is one thing that bothered me a little bit about the movie. But I enjoyed it again. It's very good. I think it is kind of geared towards a younger audience, but there are definitely jokes in there for an adult audience. The next movie I want to mention is also a cartoon. This one is anime. This is one that I saw first, I think, in 2005. And it is called Millennium Actress. It was available on Amazon Prime. I don't know if it's still there at the time I'm recording this, let alone the time that this episode gets published or posted, let alone the time that you're listening to this. But it's a very good movie. It is not a action film. It is a story about, basically it's about two people. One of them is the actress. She is the building for this movie studio is being torn down. And on this occasion, a reporter, I'm not sure if reporter is the right, but somebody is going to interview her about this. He brings a cameraman with him. They go to visit her at her home. And they get her to talk about her life at the studio. She started acting when she was a child. her career began before World War II began, but at the time that Japan had occupied Manchuria, had invaded China and occupied Manchuria, and she travels to Manchuria at one point when she's early on. You get her relationship with a director who she did a lot of movies for, and another actress who was older than her. And then the other character who the movie's about is the interviewer, because the interviewer worked at the studio when he was younger, and he had interactions with her, although she doesn't remember him at all. And he's younger than she is. He's probably 20 years younger than her. He was obviously very taken by her, very attracted to her, and there are a couple interactions there. It's a very moving movie, very powerful, excellent. I enjoyed it the first time I saw it 14 years ago. I enjoyed it all over again. There was a lot there that I did not remember. One of the the animation is beautiful, and one of the very cool aspects of it is how the interviewer and the camera, when she tells her stories, the scenes change to the movies that she was working on, and the interviewer and the cameraman find them sucked into this world. It's not. I don't know. It's a little hard to tell whether it's actually happening or not, but they feel as though they're in this world, and it's just really beautiful. And there's somebody who she met when she was younger, and he's part of the reason why she went to Manchuria, because she knew that he was going there, and she never really reconnects with him again. Well, she does, but she loses touch with him, and that's a big part of her story. And but anyway, it's a very good movie. It's a really good movie. If you've never seen it, Satoshi Kon, who also did a few other movies. It's the only one of his that I've seen that I really liked. But he also did a TV series that was an anime series, 13 episodes, called Paranoia Agent, which is very good if you can find it. I believe it's very hard to find these days. I don't think it's in print anymore. Kind of weird, kind of strange, but really good. My kind of thing, not necessarily your kind of thing. I don't know. But to certain people, I would certainly recommend it. And then the last movie that I watched was Batman and Bill. This is available on Hulu. This is about Bill Finger. And it's really about more than just Bill Finger. It's really also about this guy whose name I cannot recall. But once again, if you check the notes at smallscreenscrolls.blogspot.com, and you can find links to that at davetalkscomics.net and davetalkscomics.com. His name is in there in my notes. But he was writing a book about, I think he wanted to write a book about Bob Kane. I'm not sure. He writes children's books, and he's written some books about various characters. I really need to check. I'm not sure if this guy has been on Word Balloon or not, but if he hasn't, he really should be. The book came out a couple years ago, so the book is not new. The movie came out, actually the book probably came out more than a couple years ago. I think the book might have even been something like 10 years old. The movie came out, I think, in 2017. And basically it's about him finding information about Bill Finger. And it's about the story of Bill Finger. Bill Finger was an artist he was a writer who worked with Bob Kane, who has been credited until just recently as the sole creator of Batman. And what becomes very clear over the course of this guy's research into this is that Bill Finger deserves at least as much credit as Bob Kane does for the creation of Batman. And not just Batman, but a lot of the things that went along with Batman. Robin, the Joker, Catwoman, Gotham City, Commissioner Gordon. The list goes on. But Bill Finger never really pressed the issue. He was working for Bob Kane. He was not working for DC Comics. And when he went to DC Comics, they didn't know who he was. And it wasn't that the first time that this became an issue was in 1965 when somebody interviewed him, Jerry Bales, who I believe was who organized one of the first comic book conventions one of the first comic book conventions, which happened in the 1960s. It may have been in 1965, and he wrote a piece in there about it, and then Bob Kane got very defensive about it, and he refused to admit that Bill Finger had done any work or had worked on this at all. Anyhow, I really encourage you to watch the film. I think it's only available on Hulu. It's worth watching. It's even if you're not interested in comic books, and I don't know why you would be listening to this podcast if you weren't interested in comic books. It's definitely worth watching. So in other words, you could share this with somebody very easily who's not interested in comic books. It's a very compelling story, and at times a very moving story. And when I was at Heroes Con this year, one of the panels I went to, one of the people on the panel was a granddaughter of Bill Finger and is an artist in her own right. And I talked about that on one of the episodes of where I talked about Heroes Con, the 2019 edition of Heroes Con. Okay, I need to move on. Okay, there are 4 anime series that I want to mention. First one is Cowboy Bebop. I finished my third complete rewatch of Cowboy Bebop. I was, on the whole, very impressed with it. You can read about it in my notes at smallscreenscrawls.blogspot.com. I think I like Jet and Faye better than I like Spike. The last 2 episodes of the series are really about Spike. As quite often is the case, a lot of the stories will focus on one character or another. Even though all the characters are involved, usually it's one character or another's backstory is involved. And the last 2 episodes were a 2-parter about Spike. And I wasn't completely satisfied with that ending. It's not bad, it's just Spike doesn't do as much for me as Faye or Jet do. I find them to be much more interesting, or even Ed, for that matter, or Ein. I don't know. But it's a very good series if you've never watched it. If it's been a long time since you watched it, you might want to go back and give it another try. The animation is dated, but I think it's a very good series. An even older series, well, actually there's 2 older series I'm going to talk about here. An older series that I started to watch for the first time is Lupin the Third. This is something that Josh Greathouse recommended to me when I was at Heroes Con. We were talking about various things, and he brought up Lupin the Third, and I said I hadn't seen it. So I looked into it. You can find it available through Crunchyroll. You don't have to pay for it. You're going to have to watch some commercials, but you don't have to pay for it. You can watch this online. I think you can even watch it on a Roku. You may not be able to watch all of them on a Roku, but you can certainly watch them online. And so I've watched the first 4 episodes of Lupin the Third Part 2. There have been various series of Lupin the Third. And they've been labeled Part 1, Part 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then there's been movies, and there's been other stuff. So I watched the first 4 episodes. There's something like 160 episodes, somewhere around there, of Lupin the Third Part 2 alone. I'm going to jump around and watch. There's various episodes, some episodes that sound more interesting than others. And the other thing that I found out, which is interesting, is that towards the end of the run, Hayao Miyazaki, who did Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke and My Neighbor Totoro, worked on this series, on Lupin the Third Part 2, and there were 2 episodes that Miyazaki did, and I think one of them was the last episode of the series, and there was one other, but it was not the next to last. It was maybe 10 episodes before, or something like that. So I definitely want to watch those 2 and see if there's any detectable influence or any detectable in Miyazaki's work that's in Lupin the Third that also translated. And what was that other one that I did watch? Was Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Yes, it's another good one. So anyway, that's Lupin the Third. Moving on. I've started to rewatch again. I'm 9 episodes in at this point. A series that I watched when I was a kid. I saw it in French at the time. And when I saw it then, it was called Goldorak, because that's what it was called in France. And I believe in probably in Quebec also, it was probably called that, where it also aired in French. But the Japanese name is UFO Robo Grendizer. And maybe it's UFO Robot Grendizer. I'm not sure. I think it's... Anyhow. It's a story about a guy, an alien who comes to Earth, who, of course, looks human. He doesn't look... He's fleeing his world. His home world was destroyed by the Vegan Empire. And he comes to Earth with this robot, Grendizer. And... he's living on this ranch with these this guy. It has a very American Western feel to it, at least in that it feels like it's kind of a ranch, but it's in Japan. I don't know how common that was in Japan. It's not a perfect series. I'm watching it because I remember watching this when I was a kid. I really don't have a lot of strong memories of particular episodes when I was a kid. I know that we had toys. Me and my brother had toys. There was sticker books where, and I don't think they did this that much in the United States, but in Europe you would get, or at least in France, you would buy packs of stickers like you would buy packs of trading cards, and then there would be pictures with text in them in the sticker book, and you would put the stickers in where they were supposed to go so they would be numbered. And there'd be a number, I think, on the back of the sticker, which was, you'd peel it off. And so that part that, you peeled it off, it would still be left. And it would tell you where to put it in the book. I don't have those anymore. If I could find some of those, of course, they would be in French. And I can read some French. It'd be great to have. Anyhow, there's been a couple episodes in these first 9 that are interesting and you can find my notes, of course, at Small Screen Scrawls, where they do something that's a little different, but there are some episodes that are just too formulaic and too boring. The animation is not great. I'm not sure I would recommend this to anybody unless they're a real devotee of anime and want to see some stuff from the 1970s, because that's when this is from the mid-1970s. Okay, so those are the 2 anime series, and that makes 3 anime series. There's 3 of the 4. Okay, the 4th anime series I want to mention is Star Blazers 2199. I am now 8 episodes into that. I am really enjoying it. I think it's an excellent series. I watched the original Star Blazers when I was a kid. You can get the original Star Blazers. I'm not sure if it's in print still or how much it costs, but the only problem is it's dubbed. It's not available subtitled from what I can find. So, but this is available subtitled or dubbed. I have gotten it through Amazon, through their streaming service, so I don't have the DVDs. I just have, and it's just I think you pay for one or the other if you do it that way, but I think if you get the DVDs, it includes both the dubbed and the subbed. But it's a little more expensive. I mean, I think it's like $42 for a season, which is half of Star Blazers 21.99. It comes in 2 sets, so it would be $84 to get the full thing. And I think I paid something like $26 or $27 per half of a season. So I'm 8 episodes into of the first 13, and then I've got the next 13, which I've also bought. And then there's Star Blazers 2203, I think it is the sequel series, and that's another 26 episodes. So I'm looking forward. I'm enjoying it. I think it's really good. It's got some interesting characters. The animation is beautiful. It looks nothing like, it's nowhere near as rough as it was back in the late 70s, early 80s, whenever that series was originally made. But the story is basically the same. And as I understand it from people who have analyzed it, it's almost I don't know if it's a shot-for-shot remake, but basically it's the exact same story as the original. So if you have any interest in that, I recommend it. I mean, Earth is getting attacked by aliens. They get a message from some friendly aliens. The evil aliens are the Gamillans, I think it's how it's pronounced. And they get this message from a planet called Iskandar, trying to help them against the Gamillans. It gives them the technology to create an engine to power the ship, the Yamato. And so they take off from Earth. Well, a group of humans take off from Earth. On the way out of the solar system, they stop and attack this base on Pluto, which has been sending these bombs to Earth that they've been unable to stop. And then they take off and they're heading to Iskandar to try and get something which is going to help them to defeat the Gamillans and also rebuild Earth, because Earth has been devastated by these attacks by the Gamillans. So I'm 8 episodes of 26 into Star Blazers 21.99. Really enjoying it. Okay, 4 more shows, and then I'll be done. Okay, television. First 2 are cartoons. I have started to watch Young Justice Season 2, finally. I've had the DVDs for at least a couple years. I never watched it when it was available on Netflix. I don't think it's available on Netflix anymore. I'm only 3 episodes in, but so far I got to say I'm really impressed. There's a jump of, I think, 5 years since the end of Season 1. There's been a lot of changes, like the character who was Robin, Dick Grayson, is now Nightwing. There's a new character, Tim Drake, who is now Robin. One of the main characters from the first season is now a bad guy. And he's not in the first 2 episodes. In the 3rd episode, he shows up as a bad guy. And I think this season is subtitled Invasion, because they're under threat of invasion. First by one group of aliens, but there's hints that there's another group of aliens who were allied with the group of supervillains from the first season, who call themselves the Light. So far I got to say, if you've seen the first season, or if you've seen JLU, I mean, I'm very impressed with it so far. It has not lost a step as far as I'm concerned. The one thing, my one quibble with it, is that there is much more, it seems, of the adult superheroes, the Justice League, and I wish there wasn't. And sometimes it feels a little crowded, a little too crowded, especially with them. But they do play an important part of the plot in this series. At least so far they seem to. The other cartoon I want to mention, and I only just watched the first episode yesterday, but and it's something that came out a year ago, I think. It first came out, and there's 2 or 3 seasons of it now. There's 26 episodes. This is something that I did not watch as a kid, and that is She-Ra. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. This is available on Netflix. I'd heard a lot of good things about it. I wanted to at least try it, and I got to say, after watching the first episode, I'm pretty impressed. I understand I am definitely not the target audience. Being an almost 50-year-old male, I am definitely not the target audience, but it's got a lot of really strong, it's strong in a number of ways. And I never watched the original series. I did watch some of the Masters of He-Man, a little bit of that when I was a kid. My youngest brother was much more interested in it than I was. He had Castle Grayskull and a number of the action figures, but I saw probably with him some of these episodes of the original series of He-Man. It's possible that I've seen an episode or 2 of She-Ra. I don't recall, but I really, other than a few of the names, I really don't know anything about She-Ra. So I don't really have any history with it. So I have nothing to compare it to the original series, but I'm definitely going to continue with this, at least for a few more episodes. If it stays as strong as it was in that first episode, which is part 1 of a 2-parter, then I think I'll be watching this for quite a while. Then there's 2 series which are, I don't know, I like to think of as comic book adjacent. They both definitely have sci-fi elements to them, but they're not cartoons. First one I've mentioned before, and that's Future Man. I believe I mentioned that on episode 163. I'm now 8 episodes into season 1 of Future Man. I guess 8 episodes into the show as well. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. Not every episode is as fall down funny as some of the first couple were, but I really am enjoying it. I like all the twists and turns it's taking, how reality gets warped once or twice and things change. Them traveling to the past, traveling to the future, to accomplish various missions. I don't want to give away too much, but if you read my notes at Small Screen Scrolls, those do give away quite a bit. But I think it's a really good series, and definitely worth a try if you like things like Terminator, Back to the Future, those kinds of time travel stories. There's a good mix of humor and adventure. Ed Begley Jr. is great in this series. His relationship with this one guy who comes from the future, it's just, the two of them on screen together is magic. They're both very good. The guy who plays his character, Wolf, and Ed Begley Jr., who plays the main character, Josh's father. At one point, he's teaching him how to cook. He's teaching, what is his name? I cannot remember the father's name, but he's teaching Wolf how to cook. And it's just, the way these two guys bond is just really great, really amusing, and definitely worth seeing. And then the last series, going back to Netflix, this is a Netflix series. There's only one season available at this point. I'm halfway through it, and it's called Russian Doll. And it doesn't have a time travel element to it, but it does have there's something weird going on, and it has not been explained, at least 4 episodes in. And that is that the main character keeps getting killed and keeps coming back. And every time she comes back to the same point in time, in the same place. And the main character is played by Natasha Lyonne. And the series takes place in New York City and Manhattan. I think it's Manhattan. Actually, I'm not sure that it is Manhattan now that I say that. It may not be. But it's definitely New York City. And every time she comes back, she tries to pick up more about what's going on and why she keeps experiencing this. And of course, if she tells anybody about it, they think she's crazy because they're experiencing these things for the first time. She's the only one who remembers all these previous experiences. So she keeps coming back to the same. It's good. And then at the end of the 3rd episode, she meets somebody who's going through the same thing. And he was actually in the previous episodes, but very briefly. But if you watch carefully, you'll see him. And so when I got to the 4th episode, and I realized something told me that he had actually been in the previous episodes, because you see him talking to another character who I did remember from the previous episodes. Then I had to go back, and I kind of fast-forwarded through them, because I wanted to see, okay, where does this guy show up? And I knew at least one place where he showed up. And then in the 4th episode, they show a couple other places that he shows up. But I had to go back, and so who knows what's going on. But it's a really cool series. Only 8 episodes so far. I'm 4 episodes in. I'm really looking forward to watching more. Anyhow, I think I have gone on long enough. I've given you an idea of stuff I bought recently, stuff I've been reading, stuff I've been watching, both televisions and movie, anime and American cartoons, and other non-cartoon stuff. So that's it for episode 168 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found at davetalkscomics.com, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and if I get around to posting it, maybe SoundCloud. You can keep up with what I have currently been reading at davetalkscomics.net and what I've been watching at smallscreenscrolls.blogspot.com. I usually update those blogs on a daily or weekly basis. Links to Small Screen Scrolls can be found at davetalkscomics.com or davetalkscomics.net. Under the Other Blogs header on the right-hand side of the page. And I should say that's if you're looking at it on the web version. If you're looking at it on your cell phone or a iPad or some other tablet, you may want to change to the web view, and then you'll see it on the left side of the page. Although there should be a drop-down menu. Anyhow. So, .com, davetalkscomics.com for the cast, the podcast, .net for the notes. And those are written notes, of course. If you have any comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter @DaveTalksComics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, and closing the window, just in case some noisy vehicles drive by. Okay, let's see. Of course, that one window won't block out all the noise, but let's see. I think I'm in a good place to record. I think I'm in a good place. Five, four, three, two, one, and okay, I think I can take out that and.